The chatter inside Harbor Street Cafe was at full volume that afternoon. Forks clinked against plates, coffee cups steamed, and conversations overlapped in a symphony of everyday life. Businessmen argued over sports scores, teenagers scrolled on their phones, and waitresses balanced plates with clockwork precision. Then the glass door swung open, letting in a gust of cold Chicago air, and a small figure, a girl no more than 7, stood frozen on the threshold. Her hoodie was torn, her jeans caked with dirt, and her sneakers looked one step away from falling apart. Her name was Lily Hart, and though her frame was tiny, her eyes carried a gravity far older than her years. She took one hesitant step forward, leaving little wet prints on the tiled floor. Welcome to Nne'folktales, where we share with you an heartfelt stories that will reshape our mindset. Please like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this. The cafe fell gradually silent, as though someone had turned the volume knob down. Lily clutched the hem of her hoodie and whispered in a voice so thin it was almost swallowed by the room. "Mister, can I wash dishes for a plate of food?" For one long beat, no one moved. A man at the counter chuckled under his breath. A woman near the window muttered something about parents these days. Someone snorted, but before the waiter could step in to shoo her out, a chair scraped against the floor. All heads turned toward the back of the cafe. It was Ben Callahan, the owner, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a reputation for running his place like a military post. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke more than he had to. But now he stood, wiping his hands on a towel, and fixed the room with a stare that made the laughter die in everyone's throats. "Bring her a plate," he said. His tone was calm but final, like a judge delivering a verdict. The young waiter blinked, confused. "Sir, the same plate as table 4, Ben added, cutting off any argument. "And a glass of milk." Whispers rippled across the cafe. "This isn't a soup kitchen," someone muttered near the window. Ben turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the room. "And you're the judge of who deserves to eat?" he asked, voice steady as steel. The man who had spoken dropped his eyes, suddenly finding his coffee very interesting. Lily stood frozen, not quite believing what she'd heard. Ben crouched until he was eye level with her. "You hungry, kid?" he asked gently. She nodded, mute, and he extended a calloused hand. "Then come on. You'll eat here." She hesitated, then slipped her hand into his and followed him toward a corner booth. When the plate arrived, steaming roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and warm cornbread, the cafe was still so quiet that the hum of the refrigerator could be heard. Lily sat with her hands folded, head bowed, as though she was saying a prayer. Then she picked up her fork and began to eat, slowly and carefully, as though afraid the food might vanish if she wasn't gentle enough. She didn't waste a crumb. Ben sat back at the counter, watching her without a word. A man in a suit scoffed and said to his companion, "Feed one, and you'll have a line out the door by tomorrow." Ben didn't even look at him. His silence was louder than any reply. When Lily drained the last of her milk and scraped the plate clean, she set the fork down carefully, folded her small hands again, and for the first time lifted her gaze. Her hazel eyes found Ben across the room. She touched her chest, gave a small nod. No words, just a silent thank you. Ben inclined his head in return. When Lily rose to leave, Ben slipped into the kitchen. He returned moments later with a paper bag containing a roll, an apple, and a small carton of milk. He caught up to her just as she pushed the cafe door open. "For your mom," he said simply. Lily blinked at him, stunned, clutching the bag like treasure. "Thank you, mister," she whispered, her lips trembling as though the words were too big for her. Ben just nodded and watched her step back into the cold. He should have gone back to the cafe. There were tables to clear, bills to tally, but something made him stay by the door. He watched as she crossed the street and disappeared behind a row of buildings. Without fully deciding to, Ben followed, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, boots crunching against the slush. 2 blocks later, Lily ducked into an alley and vanished behind a row of trash bins. Ben hesitated, then stepped closer, his breath fogging in the icy air. What he saw at the far end of the alley made his chest tighten. A makeshift shelter, patched with plywood and tarp, barely big enough for 2 people, sat wedged between the walls. Inside, a woman lay on a thin mattress, her skin pale, her hair dull with exhaustion. Lily knelt beside her, pulling out the food bag like it was a gift from heaven. The woman's hands trembled as she opened it, tears brimming in her eyes. "Mom, look. Real chicken." Lily whispered, almost giddy. The woman, her name, as Ben would later learn, was Claire, pulled her daughter into her arms and held her tight before dividing the food carefully between them. Ben turned away, his jaw tight, fighting the memory of an old photograph tucked away in his office drawer. A picture of himself as a boy, sitting on a curb, hungry, until a stranger offered him a hot meal. History, he realized, was staring him in the face. This wasn't just charity. This was a second chance to repay a debt life had once paid him. Ben couldn't sleep that night. He tossed in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of his apartment, hearing the sound of Lily's small voice again and again. He saw Claire's hollow cheeks, the way she had smiled at that bag of food like it was salvation. By dawn, Ben was already at Harbor Street Cafe, brewing coffee long before the first customer walked in. But before opening, he packed 2 hot breakfasts into a bag, a thermos of coffee, and a loaf of bread, then walked the 2 blocks back to the alley. He didn't knock or call out. He just set the bag quietly by the entrance of the shack and left a note. "If you need more, I'm right down the street. Ben." Then he walked away without waiting for thanks. The next morning, he did the same, and the next. Some days he added cough syrup, sometimes socks, sometimes a cheap paperback book for Lily. At first, Claire thought it was the city handing out charity. But one afternoon, Lily found a folded cafe napkin tucked inside the bag, and her small face lit up with realization. "It's him, Mama," she whispered, clutching the napkin to her chest. "It's Mr. Ben." Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. Some customers muttered under their breath about the homeless charity project their favorite cafe had apparently become. "You keep this up," one man sneered, "and you'll have a line of beggars out front every morning." Ben just wiped the counter with slow, deliberate strokes and didn't answer. But the real challenge came from inside his own cafe. One slow afternoon, as Lily quietly nibbled on a sandwich in the corner, one of Ben's younger waiters threw down his towel and said, "This isn't a shelter, boss. You're going to ruin this place's reputation." Ben froze, the rag in his hand going still. The old Ben, the one hardened by years of scraping by, would have ignored it. But something Lily had awakened in him snapped. He slammed his hand down on the counter, the crack of it cutting through the room like a gunshot. "You think reputation feeds people," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "You think money matters more than a kid going to bed hungry." The entire cafe went silent. The waiter paled, swallowed, and looked away. No one else dared to speak. That night, Ben locked the cafe early and walked to the alley. Lily and Claire were waiting, as though they'd known he would come. He invited them both to the cafe. "You'll have a meal with me tonight," he said. Claire hesitated, pride battling desperation, but Lily grabbed her hand and whispered, "Please, Mom." They followed him back. The cafe, now empty and quiet, felt almost sacred. Ben served them himself. Steaming bowls of stew, fresh bread, and a slice of chocolate cake that made Lily's eyes go wide. Claire picked up her spoon, but paused. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. Ben sat across from her, folding his big hands on the table. "You're not a burden. You're a guest," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "And tomorrow, if you want, you can be part of this family." Claire blinked, startled. "What do you mean?" "I need help in the kitchen," Ben said. "Washing dishes, rolling silverware. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it comes with a paycheck." Claire's lips trembled. You'd hire me? Ben nodded. I'd respect you, and Lily deserves to see that. The next morning, Claire showed up in a clean thrift store blouse Ben had quietly bought through one of his suppliers. Her hands shook as she scrubbed the first mountain of dishes, but she kept her head down and worked hard. Day after day, she grew steadier, stronger, her pride returning little by little. The other cooks, suspicious at first, soon softened. She works harder than the lot of us, one of them muttered grudgingly. Meanwhile, Lily spent her afternoons in the corner booth, her school books spread out, drawing pictures of her mom at the sink, of Ben behind the counter, of herself smiling. One afternoon, she shyly handed Ben a page. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, a little girl, a woman, and a tall man in an apron. Across the top, she had written in careful letters, "Us." Ben stared at the drawing longer than he meant to. Something deep inside him shifted, something that had been locked up for years. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his office drawer. But not everyone was touched. One Friday night during the dinner rush, a well-dressed man stood from his table and raised his voice. "This place is going downhill," he barked. "First you feed strays, now you hire them. What's next? Turning this place into a homeless camp." Nervous laughter rippled through the cafe. Claire froze in mid-step, her tray trembling in her hands. Lily shrank against the booth, wide-eyed. Ben stepped out from behind the counter, his presence filling the room. "You want to leave, sir? The door's right there," he said. "But don't you dare insult the people who work here." The man smirked. "You're destroying your business." Ben's jaw clenched. "Maybe," he said, "but I'd rather lose money than lose my soul." The room went silent. The man muttered under his breath, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from something else, dignity. From that night on, Harbor Street Cafe became something different. The shelf near the door always had free bread or soup for anyone who needed it. More and more people came, quiet, tired, hungry, and left with food and a little bit of dignity. Some regular customers complained. A few stopped coming altogether. The accountant pulled Ben aside one afternoon and said grimly, "You can't keep this up. You'll lose everything." Ben just looked out the window, saw Lily helping her mother wipe down tables, and said quietly, "Then I lose everything. Some things are worth more than money." The accountant muttered something about stubborn fools and left shaking his head. Spring brought thawed sidewalks and something Ben hadn't expected, attention. A local journalist, curious about the rumors, came to the cafe and watched quietly. She spoke to Claire, to Lily's teachers, and finally to Ben. Nobody should have to beg for dignity, he told her. Sometimes the smallest kindness changes a life. A week later, the story hit the newspaper. Pictures of Lily's smile, Claire's proud posture, and Ben's weathered face spread across Chicago. Messages poured in from strangers offering donations, volunteers asking to help, people thanking Ben for reminding them what mattered. Lines formed outside the cafe, not just for food, but for hope. One warm Saturday afternoon, Ben closed the cafe for a private gathering. Tables were pushed together, food was served, and neighbors crowded in. Lily stood on a chair at the front, clutching a microphone with both hands. Her voice wavered at first, but grew stronger with each word. "I used to think nobody saw me," she said softly. "I thought I didn't matter. But Mr. Ben saw me. He gave my mom a chance. He gave me a chance. And now I want to do the same for others, so no one ever feels invisible again." The room erupted into applause. Claire cried openly. Ben, standing off to the side, pressed his lips together, trying to hide the tears that burned his eyes. That evening, as the sun set over the city and bathed the cafe in gold, Lily slipped her small hand into Ben's. "You saved us," she whispered again. Ben shook his head. "No, Lily. You saved me," he said quietly. "You reminded me what matters." And from that day forward, Harbor Street Cafe wasn't just a place to eat. It was a beacon. People said it felt different there, like the air itself carried hope. Life didn't become a fairy tale overnight. Claire still worked hard every day. Lily still studied twice as long to catch up in school, and Ben still carried the weight of his past. But together they had built something stronger than hardship, a family. And when people passed Harbor Street Cafe at night, they didn't just see glowing windows. They saw proof that kindness, even in the smallest act, could rewrite someone's story. Summer rolled into the city with its heavy heat and long evenings. But Harbor Street Cafe stayed busier than ever. The smell of fresh bread spilled out onto the sidewalk, mingling with the music from a street performer on the corner. Ben stood behind the counter one evening, wiping down mugs, when he noticed Lily sitting at her favorite booth with her notebook open. She was sketching again, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "What's that one?" he asked, leaning over when she finally looked up. Lily hesitated, then turned the page toward him. It was the cafe again, but this time she had drawn a crowd outside. People of all shapes and sizes lined up under the sign. "They're waiting for kindness," she said simply. Ben swallowed hard, unable to speak for a moment. "That's a good drawing," he managed, his voice thick. Claire joined them with a dish towel over her shoulder, smiling softly. "She's been talking about starting a box," she said. Ben raised an eyebrow. "A box?" "A kindness box," Lily explained, her eyes shining. "People can write down what they need, and someone can help. That way no one has to ask out loud." Ben felt something deep in his chest shift. "You might be onto something, kid," he said, ruffling her hair. The kindness box was placed near the door the very next morning, a small wooden crate Ben had dug out of storage and sanded smooth. A sign written in Lily's careful handwriting read, "Need something? Write it down. Someone cares." At first, people were shy. The box stayed empty for a day. Then a single folded note appeared. "Need winter coat, size 8. The next morning, a coat sat on the box with a sticky note that read, "Stay warm." Soon the box filled with requests and responses, diapers, bus fare, a pair of work boots, even a request for someone to just sit and talk. Ben watched it grow with quiet pride. One afternoon, he saw Lily pulling a note from the box and reading it aloud to Claire. "Mama, someone says they need someone to pray with them." Claire wiped her hands and said softly, "Then let's do it." They both sat in the corner booth and bowed their heads. A man at the counter put down his coffee and joined them, then another, until half the cafe was silent in prayer. Ben stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his throat tight. The cafe wasn't just serving food anymore. It was serving something bigger, connection. But not all the attention was welcome. One humid Friday evening, a man in an expensive suit stormed in, red-faced. "You're running a charity out of a restaurant," he barked loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're making the whole neighborhood look bad." Claire froze behind the counter, but Ben walked out calmly, his apron dusted with flour. "What exactly looks bad?" he asked, his voice even. "That people are eating? That a kid has shoes that fit?" The man sneered. "You're throwing money away, Callahan. People like them don't change. You'll regret this." Ben took one slow step forward, close enough that the man had to look up at him. "I'd rather regret kindness than regret doing nothing," he said, his words cutting through the tension. "Now you can stay and eat, or you can leave. Your choice." The man hesitated, muttered under his breath, and walked out, the bell over the door jingling sharply. The cafe stayed quiet for a long beat. Then Lily's small voice broke the silence. "You didn't yell," she said softly. Ben looked down at her, the corner of his mouth twitching into the smallest of smiles. "Didn't have to," he said. By autumn, Harbor Street Cafe had become more than a business. It was a movement. Strangers showed up with food donations, neighbors offered tutoring for kids who came by after school, and the kindness box overflowed with letters. Lily's grades soared, her drawings filling a wall Ben had cleared just for her gallery. Claire, no longer frail, laughed often now, her hand steady as she kneaded dough. One crisp evening, As the first leaves scattered across the pavement, Ben locked up the cafe and walked Claire and Lily home. The street lamps threw long shadows on the sidewalk. "You know," Claire said quietly, "this place saved me." Ben shook his head, slowing his steps. "No, you saved yourself. I just opened the door." Lily slipped her hand into his and said, "You opened more than that, Mr. Ben. You opened the whole world." Ben's jaw tightened as he blinked against the sting in his eyes. As they reached the apartment above the laundromat, Lily turned and whispered, "Tomorrow, can we put up a sign that says everyone's welcome?" Ben nodded. "Yeah, kid," he said softly. "Tomorrow we will." And when the cafe lights came on the next morning, a new sign hung in the window, painted in bright, hopeful colors. "Everyone's welcome. Always." People walking by slowed down, smiled, and stepped inside, proof that a single act of courage from a hungry little girl could change not just a cafe, but a whole community. Like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this, and let us know where you are watching from under the comment section.